I'm Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
Northern lawmakers are here to talk about the Minnesota legislative session and the new laws and capital spending that will impact our region.
May is Mental Health Awareness Month, a good time to talk about an illness that will affect 1 in 4 of us at some point.
And we'll have the business news and a news file story from 25 years ago.
It's all coming up next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. This week's show is recorded on Wednesday due to the Memorial Day holiday weekend. A lot on the plate, Julie. Might as well get started right away.
All right. Thank you, Dennis, and welcome everyone. The Minnesota State Legislature met for a shorter time period than normal in 2014, but there was no shortage of controversy or emotional issues during the session, which wrapped up last Friday, a few days before the constitutional deadline. We're joined now by some Northland lawmakers to reflect on the ups and downs of the legislative session. Senator Roger Reinert is a Democrat from Duluth representing Senate District 7, and Representative Carolyn Melin is a DFLer from Hibbing representing House District 6A. And thanks for coming in after a busy session for both of you. Senator Reinert, even though the session didn't start until nearly the end of February, there were some major bills that were passed pretty early on that people might not remember.
Sure.
Talk about what those early days of the session were
you know,
like.
we have to sort of go all the way back towards the beginning of session to, you know, just a couple big examples. One, of course, was the increase in the minimum wage to $9.50 now in Minnesota. That was done 4 or 5 weeks into session. Another one, which I think has almost been completely forgotten at this point, was the first tax bill. We had 2 this session, but the first one included the repeal of the business-to-business taxes. The warehousing one especially we were concerned about in Duluth because of its impact potentially on the Port of Duluth. So yeah, you're right, Julie. It seems like a while ago because so much has been done since then.
Who were the big winners in the tax bill?
Well, taxpayers. First of all, you know, especially on those business-to-business taxes, they were ones that I was never really comfortable with because we knew that that was going to be passed on at some point to the consumers. So if our goal is really to try and protect our lower and middle income wage earners in Minnesota, I think that was an important fix.
Representative Carly Melin, of course, your big bill this year, you had a couple of them, but the medical marijuana bill finally passed. And when we were on this program a few weeks ago, several weeks ago, there was a great deal of head scratching and will this ever get anywhere? It did. What helped it along?
Well, that bill certainly had its ups and downs throughout session, and I think it was an unknown from the beginning where it was going to end up. I mean, a lot of us kind of thought that we were going to come out of session with maybe not accomplishing anything, but fortunately we were able to accomplish something at the end of session. And I think that's really because of citizen advocacy on the issue. I mean, families came down to the Capitol on a very regular basis, spent about as much time there as we did, advocating for their kids, for their loved ones, in order to provide some relief through the use of medical marijuana. And really because of their outspokenness, we were able to accomplish something at the end of session.
You brought a lot of lawmakers on board from both sides of the aisle.
Yes, it became a very bipartisan issue, which was really nice to see. And I think that, you know, no matter what your party affiliation is or what area of the state you represent, we all heard these heart-wrenching stories, which really changed the minds of a lot of legislators.
The governor said some things while he was laid up in a cast that maybe he didn't intend to say, but did it seem to kind of help your issue?
Well, I think that, you know, the governor and other legislators ended up coming along after hearing more and more of these personal stories. And so, you know, ultimately we went into session not knowing where we were going to end up, but, you know, due to a lot of compromise and bipartisan work, we were able to accomplish something.
Did the police officer community ever come on board?
They ended up neutral on the final bill. A lot of their concerns were addressed. We did, scale down how many locations you'll be able to access medical marijuana and how many manufacturers you can have in the state. So, there was a lot of compromise, but, at the end, we were able to get it done, and the law enforcement community ended up with a neutral position.
And some believe that the compromise didn't go far enough in terms of allowing the use of medical marijuana. Do you see this as an issue that's going to be coming back?
I think that's accurate given the Senate's bill, which was a little bit broader in scope than the House was. I do think, to Representative Melin's credit, she really, you talk about what moved this forward. I think it was the citizen advocacy, but I think it was also Carly being willing to continually work on her bill and find a place where law enforcement was neutral and the governor was supportive. Because while I think the Senate bill is certainly what I preferred, it was broader in scope, it never had either of those factors. But it did, as Denny, you noted earlier, even the Senate bill had nearly 50 votes out of 67. It was well supported.
Could this bill become broader as years go by and perhaps less fears?
I think absolutely. I don't think we're going to go backwards on medical marijuana. 21 states have medical marijuana. This is a first step in Minnesota, and it's an important first step. We allow the ability of the Commissioner of Health to add additional qualifying conditions in the future. So as we gather more research and see what medical conditions respond to medical marijuana, more people can qualify for that sort of treatment. So, I think going forward, we're not going to be moving backwards. So I think that that's reassuring to people.
And I do very much hope that's the case. As we were sort of coming to the end of session and people realized that this was going to happen, the group I heard from the most were veterans, especially veterans that are struggling with PTSD symptoms. And that was something in the Senate bill that didn't make it into the final bill. So it is something I hope we can revisit.
Let's talk about the bonding bill, because some really good news for the community of Duluth and also for the Iron Range. Let's start
definitely.
with Duluth.
The three big projects for Duluth that came out of the bonding bill were the snowmaking system at Spirit Mountain, the Wade Stadium renovations, and then of course the North Shore Theater. And about, it seems like forever ago, but it was probably only 3 weeks, there was some doubt. The Senate came out with our bonding bill that didn't include anything except for the North Shore Theater project. And as we worked on that and pressed into it, it was an issue of a ski hill, a ball stadium, and a theater. It seemed like nice to have versus must-haves. And we had the Senate, both bonding committees had $4 billion worth of requests. So while there was a large bill at $1 billion, 3/4 of the people were told no. Well, fortunately for us, it really got everyone engaged. The stakeholders were involved. Our delegation did a great job, especially Representative Simonson. The mayor came down, and so we were able to make a push, a good sales pitch in the end.
Does the Wade need more money than it got?
I talked to Mike Rosenzweig, the owner of the Huskies, the morning that we got this all together, and he was ecstatic. That will take care of tuck pointing, it'll take care of the field drainage issue, and it'll take care of the lights. So as we look at nice to haves and must haves, I think we've covered the must haves.
They got just under $3 million, maybe?
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the winners on the Iron Range in terms of the bonding bill with the Range Regional Airport, Giants Ridge.
Yeah, I think northeastern Minnesota came out great in the bonding bill. Range Regional Airport is something that I've been working on for 4 sessions now, so I was thrilled that it made the final cut. It's really important to local economic development for our region, so it was great to get funding for the airport through the bonding bill. Also some infrastructure projects for our local community colleges, which is really important to workforce development. So was happy to see that. We also have Giants Ridge, some planning money for AEOA and Range Mental Health to consolidate their services. So, all in all, I think that, as Senator Reinert mentioned, there's always more need, and we always wish we could do more, but we really came out with a great bonding bill, I think, for northeastern Minnesota.
Duluth will see a reinstallation of the hospitality tax.
Right.
What will that mean for this city?
Well, and thank you I was going to try and come back to that, because the half-cent food and beverage is actually a really critical component to those bonding projects. So, with the vision for the Spirit Valley corridor in the western part of Duluth, you can kind of think of a mall, and Spirit and the zoo and Wade Stadium are anchor tenants. And we should note that the zoo did not get the request that
they didn't get any money this time.
Right, and we need to continue to work on that. But the half-cent food and beverage is how the city will match its portion of those projects, as well as some other projects. So, you know, the bonding success matched with the half-cent food and beverage really is good news for the Western, for everything west of 34th Avenue in Duluth.
And that 0.5% tax brings in a chunk of revenue. What is it, like 18 million a year?
Correct. Over the projected life of it, it will be 18 million.
Okay.
Now, a little bit earlier, you mentioned the minimum wage, and there are some who think that that could have a detrimental impact on businesses in the state. Are you concerned at all about that, or how do you think that it's going to play out as the minimum wage is raised and the escalator kicks in?
Well, you know, I think we need to look at a couple of things. The minimum wage had not gone up for a number of years. One of the things, and I needed a little convincing on this, but one of the things that helped get me there was that this $9.50 wage was a wage at which someone could work full-time and finally not qualify for our public health and our food assistance programs in Minnesota. The current minimum wage we had allowed people to work full-time and still need that assistance. So, you know, will there be movement in the economy? I'm sure there will, especially in the hospitality industry, and I do think that's a question we should come revisit at some point. But it was definitely the right step to take.
Carly, the governor has signed 5 more what they call unsession bills. What are they?
Well, the governor's priority this session was to have an unsession, which was, you know, to sort of streamline some of our regulations, undo old laws on the books that really didn't have any use anymore, and to work towards a more efficient government, which I think that every legislator and the governor are interested in having a more efficient government. So that was his priority this session, so we were able to pass a number of bills addressing some of those issues, and he's now starting to sign them into law. So, and those were, again, issues that had great bipartisan support. Obviously, everybody wants government to be running as efficient as possibly.
Another bill that you were that you authored, the Women's Economic Security Act, how do you see that impacting women and families in the state?
I think it's going to have a tremendous impact on working women and, you know, working families in general. And, you know, the minimum wage wasn't part of that piece, but it is an important piece because 2/3 of minimum wage earners are women.
Yeah.
And so the increase in minimum wage will have a greater impact on working women. The Women's Economic Security Act, which we also passed, requires some equal pay reporting for contractors who contract with the state of Minnesota. It also provides for pregnancy and nursing accommodations for working women. It allows for some workplace protections for wage disclosure, so simple things like women knowing whether or not they're being paid the same as their male counterparts, providing some protections in that aspect. So what it's really trying to get at is the income gap between men and women, which in Minnesota right now, women are only earning about 80 cents to the dollar, and actually in northeastern Minnesota, it's more like 73 cents. So we thought that it was, you know, it's 2014. I think we're long past due to address some of these issues. So I think we're really on the forefront nationally to be passing a bill like this, so I'm really excited about it.
Democrats really ran the table this session. Any concern that you overreached in terms of pushing your priorities through?
Well, not for me. I'm not up for re-election, so. I do think, you know, we mentioned this off camera, people may not agree with all the results, but I don't think anyone really is saying it wasn't a very productive 2.5
Shortest session in 16 years.
Correct.
Next
Yep.
legislative session, you're going to dig in for what might be more of a battleground?
Well, we'll start, I think, on January 5th, the
Yeah.
long session. You have the budget on the table, so it certainly will be a more intense, and it will be a full 5-month session in 2015.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks for
I
having
hope
us.
you enjoy some well-earned rest this
Looking
summer.
forward to being here.
Thank you
All
both
right,
very
thank
much.
you for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
This is the Domex 100T, 18 feet high, 50 feet long, and weighing in at over 200,000 pounds. It is 5 times the size of a normal road grader, and it is the new jewel for this Hibbing mining equipment company. Domex, owned by Dave Ellefson and Dan Motter, has for the last 7 years rebuilt large trucks and heavy equipment for the mining and construction industries. Well, now they've purchased the patent and manufacturing rights from another company for the world's largest grader. From now on, this $1 million machine will be built on Minnesota's Iron Range. And in proclaiming this Minnesota Mining Equipment Day, Governor Perpich advises the key to Iron Range business success is looking past the normal marketing borders.
Those that only work on a regional or local basis are going to have problems because they won't be able to just sit at home and sell their product, because people from other parts of the world will be coming into their region and into their marketplace and try to take the business away from them.
Today, Bonex employs about 40 people, but they'll have 60 on the payroll in the next 2 years to keep up with their new manufacturing venture. Today's is the kind of news Hibbing loves and the entire range needs. Darren Danielson, KDLH News.
Do you know someone who has suffered from a mental illness? Many of us do. In fact, 25% of people will face a mental health issue in a given year. Yet most people are afraid to talk about mental illness for fear of being stigmatized. Mental health professionals fight the battle to destigmatize mental illness every day, and they're using some rather creative ideas to get that conversation started. So here with more is Dr. Carolyn Phelps, a director of outpatient therapy at the Human Development Center here in Duluth, and Dr. Dan D'Allard, a licensed clinical psychologist with the Duluth Psychological Clinic. Welcome to both of you. Doctor, tell us, what price does society pay because of this stigmatization that we have of mental illness?
Well, I think a large part is that people don't get help when they feel badly about the fact that they have problems and have some sense of shame about that. And what we know is that if 1 in 4 people will develop a mental illness over the course of their lifetime, all of the rest of us know somebody in
Certainly.
our family or in our own circles who would with a mental illness.
So you bring up a good point. Everybody in our family and or in our circle is affected by that mental illness, are they not? We're all affected by it.
Absolutely.
Do you see attitudes changing about mental illness?
I do. Even in the past probably 5 years, conversations are easier. More folks are willing to say, I do know someone in my family, or I myself have suffered, and a greater willingness to self-disclose. Yeah, I do think it's changing.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a local video series that you've been putting together, Call Me Mental. We have an excerpt from that. Pretty provocative title, though.
It is a provocative title, and the idea, I love the title actually, because if you think about how people stigmatize others with mental illness by perhaps referring to them by derogatory names like as deranged or calling them mental. This documentary film series is a series of short documentaries, no more than 10 or 12 minutes long, ranging between 6 and 12 minutes long, and it puts a face on mental illness, and it's us saying to everybody else, is this who you mean when you are calling somebody mental? Because this could be your wife, your daughter, your husband, your coworker, your best friend. And so it challenges our notion that the people who we are calling mental are not them. The people who we are calling mental are all of us.
And let's take a look at that.
When people look at me, they see the crown, the sash, the big hair, the makeup, the ridiculously high heels, and the smile. They see a pageant queen. And that's exactly what I want them to see. Because then my story and my message will shock them and stick with them. Pageant queens have depression, I get a lot, followed by my ever favorite, pageant queens are capable of depressing thoughts. Yes, we are. I lost one of my really good friends, Matt Shalou, who I went to high school and college with last year in January of 2013. Nobody expected it to happen, and when I found out that he was hiding depression and that he may have survived had he sought treatment for that depression, And having been treated for depression myself, I decided that I was never, ever going to again remain silent about it and inspire as many people to get treated as possible. I sat down and asked people in my life what came to mind when they thought about a person with a mental illness. The responses I got were all along the same lines. Silence of the Lambs, Sybil, mental hospitals, straitjackets, etc., etc. Well, no wonder people with depression and anxiety are afraid to speak up about their illness if they're going to be lumped in with the likes of Hannibal Lecter. My goodness. This is why I worked so hard to get the sash and crown, so I could completely shatter that view.
So, Dr. Dan, does depression hit almost all of us at some point of our lives? And if it does, what's the difference between depression and clinical depression, or is there no difference?
Sure, that's a real good question. I think depressive symptoms exist on a spectrum, and sort of the lower end of the spectrum is temporary sadness or feeling low or not enjoying things as much as usual. And as you move up the spectrum towards the more severe end, it includes your body not working as well, your thoughts coming slower, it's harder to make decisions, your sense of yourself gets darker. 1 out of 4 of us at least in a lifetime will experience that end. But certainly we all experience enough on the lower end where it helps to talk to people, and it allows us to have empathy for folks who suffer on the farther end of the spectrum.
How important is it to catch mental health problems early, particularly in children?
Well, I think it's like dealing with any problem. You would rather deal with a smaller problem than a larger problem, sure. And the longer that we wait to treat a problem, the harder that it is to treat, and the more complex it can become. One of the things that we know is that if you are diagnosed with a single mental illness, the longer that, say depression for example, the longer that goes on untreated, the more likely you are to develop what is referred to as a co-occurring disorder or another psychological or chemical use problem. So yes, you want to get this as early as possible. And we have treatment programs that go down to infants and parents. And so we know that there can be mental health problems with kids, babies in those early formative stages in life based on some of the attachments with the parents or caregivers that they have.
I think of something as common as eating disorders. Are they a mental health issue?
Absolutely. In fact, that they are a member of the club, as it were. So one of the things that we see by all mental disorders is that we like to think about mental disorders and physical disorders, mind over here, body over here. And what we really see, if we take a look at any of these disorders, whether you're talking about anxiety or depression or eating disorders, that there is this coming together of symptoms that affect both your soul, your soul and your spirit, your thinking, how you perceive things, but also your physical body.
Mm-hmm. Dan, what's the local mental health community doing to raise awareness during this month?
A great deal of credit goes to 2 organizations, primarily in my view, the Human Development Center, and Carolyn's had a great deal to do with that. The Speak Your Mind show has helped publicize the sort of range of mental health things that people suffer from and introduced people to experts in the community who can be helpful about them. Also, a lesser known organization that I have a great deal of respect for is NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, which is an advocacy group, and it's an organization that tries to educate people about mental illness through peer-led group meetings, and there's a very active chapter here in the Duluth area.
Who typically seeks treatment for mental health issues? Are we generally forced into it or not necessarily? Do people voluntarily seek help?
Actually, people do voluntarily seek help. That's the wonderful thing, and I think the more that we get to talking about mental illness, we want to make those discussions as common around the dinner table as talking about any other topic. How you did in soccer versus how are you feeling should be a part of the conversation. So. Adults are probably the largest group of people that seek help on their own without any kind of assistance, although I think they get assistance behind the scenes, talking to friends and talking to family members or friends and family members encouraging them. Obviously with kids, more likely to be seeking help because their parents or teachers think that it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. And are there enough mental health professionals around, or is there still a shortage in your field?
I don't think there's enough around. We are blessed in this area with a lot of very competent professionals, from psychiatrists to psychologists to social workers and folks in allied fields, but there aren't enough. And I think the reasons for that are manifold, but one of them has to do with it's hard to attract professionals to come live in the area and do the work here. And our organizations are continually trying to address that, but no, we need more people.
And we know that Duluth is a wonderful place to live, but sometimes the Weather Channel doesn't help us out with that very well.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Carolyn Phelps and Dr. Dan DeAllard. Appreciate you both being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the week's business news from Business North. Louisiana Pacific, which manufactures siding in Two Harbors, Hayward, and Tomahawk, has terminated an agreement to acquire Ainsworth. Ainsworth is a Canadian company that formerly operated mills in Grand Rapids, Bemidji, and Cook. LP's CEO said the consolidation would have served the best interests of both companies, but they faced the risk of litigation in the U.S. and Canada. Both firms would have most likely been forced to divest of other important assets before regulators would approve of the deal. The parties had been negotiating a merger since last September.
Minnesota Power was scheduled to rededicate its Fond du Lac hydroelectric generating station Friday. The plant required 2 years of work to repair damage inflicted by June 2012 flooding in the region. The facility is one of 11 renewable energy installations in Minnesota Power's network, including some more than 100 years old. About $8 million was invested in the Fond du Lac Dam. Minnesota Power will host dedications at several other facilities later this summer, including Thompson Hydro, which also sustained damage in 2012.
National experts in liquefied natural gas gathered Wednesday at UWS for a conference on the emerging markets for LNG in the Great Lakes region. The product increasingly is being used by trucking fleets as a low-cost substitute for gasoline, and it's being considered as an alternative for the heavy fuel typically burned on Great Lakes cargo vessels. Participants were set to discuss the safety of liquefied natural gas and possible development of a better supply chain. Currently, it lacks an adequate regional processing and distribution system. For more on these and other business stories, visit businessnorth.com.
If you have a comment, now's the time to call. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message, or send an email to almanacnorth@wdse.org. You can also visit the WDSE website for program schedules, updates on your favorite PBS shows, and news about the station. And we want to wish everyone a happy and safe Memorial Day weekend, Julie.
Yeah, it should be nice so everybody can get outside and enjoy it.
Temperatures, again, maybe hovering around the 70-degree mark. So.
A little rain, but we need that too.
Okay, all right. For Julie and the crew at WDSE, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody, and be kind.